The number of victims seeking services to deal with human trafficking
that were once victims of human trafficking.
It's in our neighborhoods, it's in our kids' school, it's in our churches. This is happening everywhere.
Human trafficking. It is a modern-day slavery in which men, women, and children are forced to do a labor or commercial sex act. It is a hidden crime due to the fact that victims rarely come forward due to language barrier, fear of traffickers, and a fear of law enforcement. 600,000 to 800,000 people are trafficked across international borders each year. There is a higher percentage of children being sold because most of these children are orphans or runaways. There are 100,000 to 300,000 prostituted children in the United States. Human trafficking has been happening to a very large extent, and people often do not hear about it happening in their communities.
For a change, instead of being ignored. He made it possible to where I went shopping, and then the next morning he told me about how I can make some really good fast easy money. I was like, okay, I'll try it. And he put me out on the street, and I came home with $750. It was kind of exciting because it had the thrill of hiding away from police when they were around, and I don't know, there was this excitement, like adrenaline rush kind of thing in the beginning. About 7 months afterwards, I had gotten raped by John, and Juan didn't believe me, and so that was my first beating. And it wasn't so much the beating, it was I got pepper sprayed and put into a shower for 3.5 hours, a cold shower. And I tried to leave, and then it just turned out to be worse. I invested so much time and so much money into Juan that everything was tied into him. I didn't have a house, I didn't have a bank account, I didn't have my own car, I didn't have anything. So if I left Juan, I left everything. I had nowhere to go, nobody to, what can I do now? If I get away, I did that, I tried to get away, and I tried to go to people that I thought would help me, and hey, look, what do I do? I just had to figure out how and who was going to help me, because there's no way I could have done it on my own. I was strong, but I wasn't strong enough. And the more I stayed, the more I got weaker. I felt like there was a medallion just hanging in front of my face the whole time. Still to this day, I can't figure it out. Because now that it's been so many years, I've kind of figured out how to get back to being Nicole again. And I can't see how I let that happen. It happened. And there's nothing I can do about it now. And I know that I'm a good person. I know that I try to do good by people.
Over 70% make sex trafficking one of the most profitable businesses in the world. Human trafficking helps businesses make more money because it helps businesses obtain free labor and resources. In the human trafficking market, consumers are employers of trafficked labor, and the products are human beings. Human trafficking has caused many victims to suffer to the extent that they are affected socially, physically, and emotionally.
Victims from human trafficking are affected socially. Human trafficking victims cannot escape due to language barrier. With this language barrier, it's difficult to escape and find someone who can help understand them to provide help. Most victims have been severely traumatized by their experience of being treated like an animal. These victims build a wall to protect themselves from others and prevent that horrible experience from happening again.
Human trafficking physically affects those who become victims. Physical effects are bruises, broken bones, malnutrition, sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, and etc. Traffickers who use victims to smuggle drugs might drug their victims so they do not fight back when they are being raped. These drugs can damage the victim's brains because the drugs traffickers use are very strong. These drugs can even cause the victims to die if they are overdosed with the drugs.
Victims of human trafficking are often affected mentally. For example, Many victims suffer from PTSD and struggle in recuperating from drugs that traffickers used on them. Emotional effects are anxiety, insecurity, memory loss, depression, and suicide.
In conclusion, human trafficking affects victims socially, physically, and emotionally. Many of these victims may be your family members, friends, and neighbors. It is important that this issue is solved because it affects many victims to a great extent.
We identified and rescued more than 850 children who were victims of child exploitation and over 300 victims of human trafficking.
Who hurt women and children and who spread human misery and suffering. Human trafficking and massive drug inflow must also be stopped.
Be informed of human trafficking that occurs around you and report any signs of it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline.